I'm actually surprised that she's calling to ask me this, because in every save file I've ever played, Jess Sigworth has never had a problem having babies. And I think even in this current save file, she's already got 5 or 6. But on you go, Jess, knock yourself out. Hi there, welcome to my channel and welcome to part 4 of Strangerville Mystery with Cameron Fletcher. Last time, Cameron had visited the secret lab and discovered there was strange spores in the air that made him act a little bit strange, and he has since acquired a scanner and he is scanning for spore clusters, which he's going to give to the scientist to continue helping him solve this mystery. Cameron has completed the first 2 parts of the Strangerville aspiration and he is on to the third of 4 parts. He has to collect 15 spore clusters, assemble the hazmat suit and travel to the deepest part of the secret lab, which he is going to do in this episode today. In his search for spore clusters, Cameron returned to the secret lab, where he found that not only had the bizarre plants around that area grown into their larger form, but they seemed to be more numerous than they were before. He began scanning them for spore clusters and found that the plants at the lab produced much more than the ones in town had, making his search much more efficient there. In fact, Cameron only had to scan 3 plants at the lab to acquire all the spores that he needed. It seemed like, unlike the plants in town which only generated 1 spore cluster, the ones at the lab generated 5 each. With the spore clusters gathered, Cameron then headed into the lab to carry out Quentin's request. He set out to find the chemical analyzer so that he could analyse the clusters and acquire the data that Quentin had requested from him. In the basement of the lab, there was that horrible area where there were all the spores, but there were also other corridors, and it was through those that Cameron found the labs with the chemical analysers. The air there was safe to breathe, and so he was safe to continue with this part of his mission. Despite being a little creeped out to find various incarnations of bizarre plants contained in strange glass containment centres at the lab, Cameron continued about his work, using the chemical analyzer on the spore clusters he had found. Once Cameron had completed his analysis, his diligent analysis of the collected spore cluster had paid off. He had created an infection profile data, which he could take to Quentin for further analysis. The next morning, as he enjoyed his breakfast, Cameron invited Quentin over to his house so that they could discuss what he had found at the lab. Quentin was impressed with Cameron's diligence. "Wow, you did it," he said. "Let me analyse this infection profile data and I will send you a spore filter in the mail soon. Keep digging and you might find a vaccine for this infection after all." That sounded good. A vaccine that could cure that odd way the people around town like Jess had been behaving. Maybe if Cameron did that, the staff would return to the lab and he could finally start his new job. True to his word, Quentin did send the spore filter in the mail. This can be used to modify an incomplete hazmat suit. Question the curio shop owner about spores, he might have an incomplete hazmat suit to sell. And so Cameron had his next task laid out ahead of him. He would have to return to Erwin to find out if he could purchase from him an incomplete hazmat suit to combine with a spore filter. "I have a couple of those hazmat suits in my secret inventory," Erwin told him. "I doubt they will do much good without a spore filter, but I would be willing to sell it to you if you are still interested." Of course Cameron was still interested because he already had a spore filter, and combining the incomplete hazmat suit that Erwin sold him with the spore filter would give him a complete hazmat suit. Despite the hazmat suit that Erwin had being an incomplete one, he still wanted 1,000 simoleons for it. Thankfully, Cameron had enough money to pay for this. "Enjoy your brand new incomplete hazmat suit," Erwin said. "I told you it was missing a crucial component. You might want to question scientists about spores. They might be able to provide some kind of spore filter." Cameron decided not to tell Erwin that he was already ahead of him in that respect. And, combining the incomplete hazmat suit with the spore filter, gave Cameron a complete hazmat suit and allowed him to check off another part of his aspiration. With the hazmat suit assembled, the only part of this stage of the aspiration left for Cameron to complete was to traverse to the deepest part of the secret lab, pass through the toxic hallway to open the final door in the secret lab. That sounded dangerous, but also a little exciting to Cameron. And so Cameron returned to the secret lab. Before he entered this time, however, he made sure to put on his hazmat suit, so that this time those spores would not be able to affect him the way they had the last time he had tried to reach the deepest part of the basement of the secret lab. Once more, Cameron used the keycard to open the door and begin his journey down to the basement. Feeling focused and determined, he continued down towards that corridor, full of all those toxic spores. Cameron continued through the corridor, and this time, with the help of the hazmat suit and the spore filter, he was completely unaffected. He was finally able to use his keycard to open that next set of doors and find out what lay beyond them. He noticed at that set of doors there was a poster saying hazmat suit required. It was a bit late to put that sign up, considering the spores reached much further up into the lab, but nothing could be done about it now. Down at the deeper level of the basement, Cameron found yet more corridors. It was really quite incredible how expansive the secret lab actually was. He then found what looked like a sort of server room of some sort, and inside he found a whole lot of those glass chambers filled with various different types of bizarre plants, tendrils and all sorts of strange things. And growing on the walls at the very back of the room was some sort of pulsing, glowing vine. He moved closer, deciding it was probably best not to touch any of those vines. They seemed to get thicker, and there seemed to be more of them as he moved further towards another set of locked double doors. He used his key card, and once more the doors opened to reveal, as Cameron checked off that last part of his milestone, moving into the final stage of his milestone, he found himself face to face with a giant plant. A giant sentient plant, like nothing he had ever seen before. He tried to communicate with it. Perhaps he could reason with it, but it didn't seem very receptive. This, he assumed, must be the mother he had heard referred so many times by the Sims behaving strangely around Strangerville. Cameron tried to tell the mother plant about how he enjoyed vegetables, but she kind of just ignored him and went back to how she was before. And so he decided he would fight her. He would fight her, to beat her down, and to teach her that she needed to stop this nonsense that was going on in Strangerville. The mother plant acted wildly and aggressively, much more wildly and aggressively than Cameron had expected any plant could. He continued his attempts, trying his best, but then suddenly, the plant reached out and grabbed him and began throwing him around, until eventually it deposited him on the top step and left him feeling overwhelmed. The mother plant is extremely powerful. Best not fight her alone. Try vaccinating and recruiting allies to help defeat her. That sounded like a sensible idea. Cameron turned around, not wishing to repeat that feeling again in a hurry, and headed home. The next part of his aspiration, the final stage of the Strangerville Mystery aspiration, was to vaccinate 3 Sims, recruit 3 Sims to stop the source of the infection, and defeat the source of the infection. That sounded simple enough. But first of all, Cameron would have to find out how to make a vaccination, and then successfully make one. As he left the lab, Cameron couldn't help but notice that the sky had turned even stranger. There was dust whipping about everywhere, and Strangerville looked even stranger than usual. Not to mention the fact that the bizarre plants were even bigger and more obvious than usual. It was like the mother had been strengthened by their confrontation. Stop the infection. You've discovered the source of the infection plaguing Strangerville, an enormous mother plant buried in the base of the lab. The only way to get the town back to normal is to defeat the vile creature, find a cure for the infection, and assemble a team to destroy the mother plant. When he got home, Cameron called Quentin to ask for some advice on how he could prepare himself to vaccinate Sims and face the mother plant once more and hopefully finally defeat her. If we can get some spore clusters and a bizarre fruit to the chemical analyzer at the lab, we can start working on a vaccine against the infection, Quentin told Cameron. And so, with that goal in mind, Cameron set out to gather spore clusters and bizarre fruits to create a vaccine. And with that, we will end this part of Cameron's story. Tune in next time as he assembles all the necessary ingredients and creates the vaccination and continues his battle against the mother to solve the mystery of Strangerville. Thanks for watching. I hate doing this part of the game. I hate when you have to come back to the secret lab and use the chemical analyzer deep in the basement, because I know it's not the style of The Sims 4 and it's certainly not the style of this pack, but I always feel like something's going to jump out on me suddenly or sneak up on me suddenly and I'm stuck in the basement and I can't get away.